Let's give a big hand of applause to Ada Ackerman. Thank you, Ada.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Huge honor to be here. Given the fact that the conference revolves around the question of the potentialities of AI, my talk today will focus upon several artistic projects which rely upon AI technologies from a critical perspective to convey a post-colonial and decolonial discourse, to give voice to marginalized and repressed groups, to build counter-narratives and counter-victories to suggest alternative paths. Those speculative approaches, which are flourishing there and at them, have to be understood within the broader frame of AI latent spaces producing a specific modality
and paradigm of culture, that is counterfactuality, which I will develop, and which blur the usual temporal categories related to archives and historical documents. As a matter of fact, in the age of AI, historical materials are reorganized within computational spaces that determine their visibility, legibility, and narratability. Thus, AI introduces a new level of algorithmic mediation of the past, turning the past into what we could label a vast field for a whole spectrum of algorithmic operations, including the potentiality of rewriting it, of reimagining the conditions of its appearance, of exploring the past by opening in a very dynamic manner a field of virtualities. In all the projects I will discuss today, the notion of absence is paramount, whether absence of data, absence of representations, and AI is used in each case as a medium of negotiation with those missing entities, which thus can be suggested, conjured, visualized, thanks to generative AI models. So first, counterfactuality as the historical modality of culture in latent spaces. I'm bringing here several texts which have discussed this notion of counterfactuality, which is really paramount to understand what kind of production generative AI fosters. So I'm quoting a text which has not been unfortunately translated into English by the French artist Grégory Chatonsky and the researcher Antonio Somaini, Sortir du paradigme de la copie, in which they discuss latent space in those terms. With latent space, cultural heritage is no longer a debate between the ancients and the moderns, between the repetitive preservation of tradition and the clean slate of disruption. From a heritage, we can not only create something new, as we usually did, but also immerse ourselves into the past by making it possible, that is, by creating alternative versions. Counterfactualization is undoubtedly the new historical mode of culture in latent space. We can return to the traces of the past by creating them, by reinventing them, imagining the archives that we lack, precisely because they come from minority, invisible, or destroyed histories. And in the same time, they also between past and future, between factuality and facticity. In another text, Grégory Chatonsky and the French theorist Yves Citon also suggest those productions as disrealism, calling them, describing it as follows: the counterfactual nature of this alien realism disrupts what we previously based our clues to truth on. The German filmmaker who passed away that year, Alexander Kluge, who, as you may know, embraced AI in his filmmaking practice, described the way he experimented with AI in a book which I highly recommend to you, The Dragonfly's Eye, in which he describes the potentialities unfolded by AI techniques as a conditional of images, a conjunctive der Bilder. And I'm very interested in the way he described it. I'm quoting him, even if we could discuss whether the term virtual camera is the right one to describe moving images fostered by AI. He writes, a virtual camera is a thought experiment. Our ability to make extensive use of such virtual cameras includes millions of as yet untested opportunities. The AI camera allows to film the conditional hypothesis heterotopias. Another concept which I believe is productive to label and to describe those new documents produced by AI is the famous concept of the unarchive, which was initially coined by Derrida, that the French artist Gwenola Wagon and the French theorist Pierre Casounogues understand in a new light and reframe in a new light and apply to AI. So this is how they describe the AI unarchive, we could say. I quote them. AI images form an unarchive, a generalized archive in which several versions of events coexist, several versions of reality. We have a machine for traveling in time, space, and the possible. The machine allows us to imagine different pasts and travel into them, to observe and transform them. The past is forked like the future, and a multitude of alternatives are mixed in. So you can see all these discourses are really resonant with each other. Another very interesting text which I highly recommend, which has just been published, is by Antonio Someini, called Latent Spaces, AI, Art and the Archive, in which Someini describes latent spaces as matrices of potentialities, in which the generative AI models materialize what could have happened and creating statistically plausible objects that never existed. And in that respect, Someini brings the notion of the archival impulse as it had been theorized by Hal Foster to describe how contemporary artists have embraced AI today to create a kind of new meta-archival impulse in which this idea of reopening the potentialities of the past is central. So we could say that not only AI-generated productions are counterfactual in essence, but also that counterfactuality would find in AI its perfect medium. And that in that respect, AI reloads and enhances a counterfactual thought which has already a long tradition. We could sum it as the power of what if. And I'm just bringing one example, a very famous one by Blaise Pascal in his Pensées, when he states that if Cleopatra's nose had been shorter, the whole face of the earth would have been transformed. And in that long genealogy of what if, of counterfactual thought, I'm very fond of this fascinating book by Charles Renouvier, which is the first examples of Uchronia, this new genre, parallel to utopia. And in that book, Renouvier imagines a fictionalized history of Europe stemming from a more progressive Middle Ages period, which would have fostered a much more radical version of the 1970-89 revolution. And what is interesting in that book, it is not only that it is a Uchronia, which is written by a false monk, which presumably was burned for his heretical views. What is interesting is that in that book, Renouvier delivers a treatise about how to write counterfactual writings, counterfactual history. He really gives you a kind of method and a self-reflexive methodological thought about what it means to write a counterfactual history. So he debunks the illusion of a fait accompli. And he really stresses, and you will see why it is resonant with what I'm talking about today, that it forces the mind to go back to the thought of possibilities that have not been realized, and to go back to those possibilities which are still pending in the world. And as I said, he's providing a method to write uchronistic productions. He provides a diagram. So in that diagram, the line corresponding to big O, small a, is the line corresponding to the fact as it happened. And the writer who wants to deviate from that has to create an angle, the line big O, big A, sorry. And the broader the angle is, the broader is the deviation. And then from that deviation, you can create endless forkings. And I like to say that in a way, for me, it is a proto-latent space. So I think it's really useful today to go back to Renouvier's book, also to grasp this counterfactuality brought up by AI. And there are numerous examples. Another one I like is by Louis Geoffroy, in which Louis Geoffroy imagines a world in which Napoleon wouldn't have been defeated. And again, he writes, how many have sighed after these interrupted dreams, begging heaven to finish them? In a way, AI is a machine which allows to switch again those interrupted dreams. And it is not surprising then that some authors have embraced AI as a way to develop Uchronia. In France, we have this book, Si Rome n'avait pas chuté, If Rome Hadn't Fallen, in which, again, the author, Raphaël Dohan, delivers in his introduction a vademecum about Uchronia in the age of AI. As you know, of course, counterfactual history is also a branch, a historiographical branch, with many important books. And recently, you would have exhibitions such as this one in Berlin at the Deutsche Historisches Museum, which tried to go back to German history by looking at some turning points and imagining what could have happened. And I believe that this renewed interest in counterfactual thought is totally fueled by the advance of AI today. And again, in the introduction of the catalog, Raphael Gross, the curator, writes that in history books, little attention is paid to what could have been, and that they are trying to answer to that in the exhibition. It is interesting also to note that before the AI models we know arrive, a very important book was released about counterfactual thought, counterfactual philosophy by Christopher Prendergast, in which he launches an invitation to see the fork in the road, the meeting between the actual and the possible. And lastly, it is very surprising that in the book Counterfactualism in the Fine Arts, published in 2023 by Elke Reineber, nothing is said about AI, while we would have expected AI to be like the central topic of such a book. But nevertheless, what she writes about counterfactualism is, again, very useful to grasp what AI is bringing. And I would like also to connect this interest in counterfactuality to the potential thought as it has been unfolded by Camille de Toledo, Alyosha Imhoff, and Counterfactuals in the book The Potentials of Time, in which they invite us to develop a potential thought as a way to escape closed narratives and to go back not only to potentialities of the past, but also to the potentialities of the future. And again, I believe that many projects I will discuss today are to be inscribed within such a potential thought. So within those attempts to use AI from a counterfactual perspective and from a decolonial agenda, as I said, there is always this question of the missing entity, the missing images with whom we are negotiating and to which we are trying to answer and to cope with. Even in a broader sense, we could say that many of AI-powered projects try to answer to a missing image. It raises many questions because it is not because we have a technology that enables us to fill the gaps that we have to do it. So we have always to keep in mind the ethical frame. How do we fill the gaps and why do we fill them? I'm bringing that very stimulating book by Judith Schlanger, Présence des œuvres perdues, in which she states a kind of paradox in which cultural memory is in fact more made of emptiness than fullness. But the tension comes from the fact that our intellect is an intellect of fullness and is never at ease with absence. In terms of missing images, a very important book which was published in 2012 was very seminal for me, called Les Images Manquantes, Missing Images, so published much more before AI technologies appeared, but in which Dorg Zabounian, who is the editor of the book, sets a whole series of questions which I believe are still very apt today, because he says that we can't speak about missing images without asking ourselves to whom those images are missing, where are they missing, how are they missing, and are they missing at the same extent for everyone? So this is very important to keep in mind. And also, I'm very attached to the writings of the artist and activist Mimi Onuoha, who has been serving a lot the question of missing data. In her work, The Library of Missing Data Sets, she states that the word missing is inherently normative. It implies both a lack and an out. Something doesn't exist, but it should. And many of AI-driven artistic projects answer to that double implication. So we could say that some of those AI-generated images stand as a new tool of occupying the ground of visibility. And I would even like to suggest that they can be seen as a strategy of representing in the way Paola Baghetta understands that term, as a strategy to fight archival violence, as an epistemic resistance to archives' constitutive exclusions. So she has coined the concept of representing about the archives of the LGBTQI community, but her conclusions could be definitely applied to decolonial approaches as well. The endeavor to answer to missing images with the use of AI has also to be understood as a gesture of resistance against the neocolonialism, which is at the center of the main AI infrastructures, as very well described by Kate Crawford in her seminal book, Atlas of AI. as a resistance to the colonial matrix of power formed by artificial intelligence, which has been very well described by James Malden and Boxy Awu, when they state that by locating the production of AI systems within the colonial matrix of power, we contribute to the critical and decolonial literature on the legacies of colonialism in AI and the hierarchies of power and extraction that shape the development of AI today. Another author, for instance, Lilia Mary Hampton, even speaks of a techno-racial capitalism. Against those neo-colonial aspects, which take numerous forms, and I won't describe all of them, several thinkers have tried, oops, that's not what I want to do. Several thinkers have tried to establish, on the contrary, a decolonial thought of AI. I'm just quoting this very important AI Decolonial Manifesto, which was launched by Samelo Mlambi, in which manifesto, as you can see, is written with a Y in order to translate a diversity of points of view. And they write, this manifesto is a provocation, a question, an opening, a dance about the future of AI technologies, that is decolonial. So all the projects I will now present to you have to be understood within that wake of an AI decolonial attempt. So first, I will turn to some artistic projects which try to set a decolonial resistance to AI systems, and at the same by the same token, which try to reframe the colonial content and structure of museums. So, for instance, there is this work by the American artist North Al-Jawazir, which was presented in our exhibition, The Road Through AI, in which North Al-Jawazir answers to, we could say, to two defects. So North Al-Jawazir's family comes from Iraq and from Saudi Arabia. And first, she started a journey and a survey by collecting pictures from main Western museums, pictures related to the regions of her family origins. And she was very struck by the fact that those pictures, which were taken and collected from the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th, were taken and thought through a colonial exotizing lens. So, for instance, she worked a lot on the pictures by Gertrude Bell. And then she submitted those pictures she had collected to some AI analytical systems. And she was totally shocked to see that those systems were unable to correctly identify the objects and the people. So, for instance, a Bedouin here is tagged as a samurai, or a minaret mosque would be described as a lighthouse. And those hallucinations, those mistakes are due to the fact, of course, that people and cultures from those regions are absent from the data sets which were used to train those models. So with her work, she answers to those, to both of those lacunas. First, the colonial gaze in the photographs, and then the colonial training of those data sets. So what she did is that she rewrote the picture she had gathered by subtracting, by erasing the silhouettes, so that the subjects of the pictures would vanish, would disappear. And in a way, it is a strategy by her, by the artist, to say, if you don't know how to look at us, if you don't know how to decipher us, then we should disappear from the field of visibility. So in a way, she enhanced this invisibility to return it against each other. And then she used all those reworked images to create with GANs new images in which those silhouettes were enhanced and demultiplied. And she says that she's working in that perspective with an absent data set. So this is a strategy. Another one is by the Benin artist Mine Atairu in a project called Igun, which starts with a totally counterfactual basis, because the project raises that question. What would have happened if Benin had not been invaded by the British in 1997? And moreover, what would have happened to the artistic history of that country? Because when the British invaded the country, it not only they looted many of the artworks, the Benin bronze, but also it fostered a kind of decline in artistic production. So she tried, she trained GANs on some existing bronze to suggest the bronze that could have been created if Benin had not been invented. So creating that kind of counterfactual path. And she has developed it in several versions, including one which I found very compelling in the version called Deshrined Ancestors, in which she stages the pedestal of a Benin bronze former belonging to the Rhode Island School of Design Museum in the States, which was returned to Benin. So there is this mark of absence. And I think it's very important in those projects when you have a kind of negotiation made visible, a dialectics between absence and presence. So first, the visitor would encounter this empty pedestal, and then he could activate through how would you say, a code, a QR code, sorry, the images of those imagined bronze. Another project I'm very fond of, which was also presented in the World Through AI, is the archive of the unnamed workers created by two Chypriot artists, Alexia Kileos and Theopistis Stylianou Lambert, in which they go back to the history of archaeology in Cyprus. Cyprus was a location which was much invested by foreign archaeology from the 19th century. And if we know very well the names, the identities of the chief archaeologues, we don't know much about the workers, the people who materially enabled the excavating. So they tried to repair that lack by using AI to give those workers an image, to give them a presence. So this is how they describe their work. We cannot go back in time to photograph the omitted, but art offers us tools to imagine what might have been, to question the balance of power, and point out representational gaps. And it is totally connected to a research project that they have led called Decolonizing Archaeology-Related Photograph Archives. So this project is fueled by, you could say, a Marxist, materialist approach by focusing upon the excluded workers from the scene of visibility, but also from a post-colonial lens, because they really put at the center of the focus those Cypriot workers. And they said that the generative AI models, they tested the dominant ones, were totally unable to produce convincing Cypriot people pictures. So in the installation takes the form of a slideshow, because the portraits they gained with AI were transferred onto slides, and they were projected through this in that white box that you can see. So you would see those portraits by peering through the holes of the cube, so that it wasn't so easy to see them. So it was also a kind of materialization of the difficulty to access to those people. And for me, it is also a materialization of this negotiation with a faulty past. And I believe this museal frame is very important, so that those portraits are not mistaken for a fake archive. And that's why I labeled those images in the essay I wrote for the catalog, The World Through AI, as prosthetic images, because those images are not perfect. When you see them, they have some defects, and again, they are mediated through the cube. So I believe that those images are not totally illusionistic, so they do not obliterate the obliteration to which they respond. And I label them as prosthetic images because they fill in a gap, but as a prosthesis, their added extrinsic nature remains clearly visible, so that they express this process of negotiation. So I'm also proposing to label them as ersatz images. We could also describe them as a kind of digital kintsugi. And Maxime Derian, in his Deconstructor Conservatism Manifesto, calls also for the production of such digital kintsugi with a critical perspective. Another case is when artists use AI to produce images which could not exist in their time, and trying to revert a power dynamics. So this is the case with the Brazilian artist Mayara Ferran in her series called The Album of Unforgetting. I really like this notion of unforgetting, because to have an unforgetting, you have to have the memory of what has been forgotten. And in that series, she uses AI to foster images of lesbian couples issued from slaves in the time of a colonial Brazil. So we see whether black couples, whether slave couples, female couples, getting wedded, pregnant, and so on. And of course, at that time, the slaves wouldn't have access to pictures technology, so they couldn't have access to the industry of memory as the family album and so on. So Mayara Ferran inverts that and tries to suggest what could have happened if those people would have had access to those pictures. But of course, we are not fooled by them. We know that they were impossible to be taken. So it is a way to raise an absence while answering to it. We could criticize her romantic approach, because in a way she reconducts many topos of what love should look like. And we could also say that she erases the violence of slavery, because those people won't have time to enjoy the pregnancy. So I'm not saying I totally agree with such an approach, but it is important to bring them. I don't want to be too long. I would like also to bring that example by Felipe Villas-Boas, which is also totally created in a counterfactual mode. In that project, Felipe Villas-Boas imagines what would have happened if the discovery of America hadn't been done by Colomb and Vespucci, but by the Malian emperor Aboubakar II, who had, according to some legends and some tales, the desire and ambition to go beyond the Atlantic and to discover other countries and territories. So Villas-Boas imagines the letters he could have written and the journey, the paths it could have fostered. And just to note that Felipe Villas-Boas is very interested in a decolonial approach intersected with the history of technology. I really like this effective Congo soap, which sums up so many issues of the digital industry. I've spoken a lot about cultural history, but artists have also used AI in order to deconstruct a colonial frame for so-called natural artifacts as well. The Brazilian artist Gisele Begelman, in her Botanica Tyrannica, has also used AI in order to expose the colonial and racist and sexist biases of the botanist science, because she has been focusing upon some infamous names given to some species. For instance, the Thunbergia alata, the Bunda de mulata, which means the mulatto's girl's bottom, or the Tridescantia zebrina, which means the wandering Jew. So she really exhibits those biases in the history of biology and botanists. And she has hybridized those plants in order to, we could say, emancipate, free them from that frame. And she has also created a real garden with those seeds that she has cultivated and nurtured. And maybe I would like to end this presentation with a last example, which does not use generative AI, but which use the power of algorithmic editing, of algorithmic montage, again, to disrupt and to debunk some colonial taxonomies and narratives in the fascinating work by Ho Tzu Nyen, who is an artist from Singapore and who has, in many projects, tackled the problematic identity of Southern Eastern Asia, which is, according to him, a total artificial entity. And one central work, one nodal point of his projects is that engraving by Heinrich Leutemann, which shows the British engineer George Coleman being interrupted by a tiger as he was bringing a theodolite. A theodolite is a measure instrument, so to measure the land. So in a way, the tiger, according to Ho Tzu Nyen, embodies the local forces interrupting the colonial attempt to measure the land, to possess the land. So he has come back to that engraving in many of his projects, staging it many times, including a project called CDOSIA, which is the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia, which you can find online. And while the project was started in 2016, he has included since then algorithmic tools, so that all the entries of this dictionary, of this encyclopedia, are constantly reassembled, re-edited thanks to this algorithmic tool. And it is the idea to disrupt a linear understanding of what is Southeast Asia, but also to undermine the very genre of an encyclopedia, of a dictionary, with its rigid entries. So it is a dynamic, always evolving encyclopedia, and which is structured along letters. And I'm just showing you a short excerpt of how it looks like. This is how it was presented in Mudam in Luxembourg. I hope you can.
Suddenly the bodies of the chemical and now all the languages of the world have mixed together there. As the voice can be heard, no one ever arrives. And someone else because the data has been there. On the shelter zones of refuge, forests, mountains, archipelagos, which are also the zones of zoo system, against the zone of patrol, the solution summary. One of the largest remaining United States zones in the world, but the largest is the vast expanse of uplands known as Southeast Asian Massive Anatolia. This great mountain realm on the marches of mainland Southeast Asia, China, India, and Bangladesh.
So a very dense found footage combination edited by AI. And this is like the last iteration of that project in his exhibition Phantom Days and Stranger Tales at the Luma Arles. But I would like to conclude with that always evolving form, which according to me is one maybe of the most interesting and radical potentiality of those algorithmic works. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Gale Elston, the founder and director of Recreate Foundation, the sponsor and organizer of this event. AI, its cultural, political, and philosophical potentialities. We welcome the curator of this event, theorist and artist Warren Neidich, right over here. Warren has studied visual art, neuroscience, medicine, and architecture. His multimedia practice, encompassing neon, photography, video, and painting, pursues what he terms a third way of epistemological justice, in which all forms of knowledge are regarded as sacred and essential to planetary survival. He is a contributing editor at Bomb magazine and a correspondent for O2 magazine. He has taught at numerous institutions, including Brown University, Harvard Graduate School of Design, University of California, LA, University of California, Berkeley, University of California, San Diego, the California Institute of the Arts, University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, Goldsmiths, University of London, the Sorbonne, Central St. Martin's, and Weizsäcker Academy in Berlin. He is the editor of the Psychopathologies of Cognitive Capitalism, parts 1 to 3, author of an activist neuroaesthetics reader, archive books, and Neuromocked for Merv Verlag, and co-editor with Deborah Hopman of Cognitive Architecture from Biopolitics to New Politics. He's going to present for us now on the emancipation of the neural-epistemological commons, resisting data and intellectual enclosures. So let's give a big hand to Warren.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been an amazing experience in so many ways. I've had so many epiphanies during this event, and I'd like to thank you all for participating and having the faith in me to make the long journey here. Today, I'm going to talk about In the Fog of the Digital, AI, the Brain Without Organs, and Ecoplanetary Organogenesis in Cognitive Capitalism. The phrase, the fog of the digital, is reminiscent of the earlier concept, the fog of war, generally attributed to the Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz to describe the complexities and ambiguities inherent in the theater of war. The term highlights the difficulty of gathering accurate and timely information in a dynamic, unpredictable, and unsteady immersive environment, and points to the visually obscuring and cognitive deranging effects of billowing clouds of smoke and the associated cacophony of discordant sounds emanating from the bombardment surrounding the individual soldier and affecting their corporal senses and clarity of thought. War disables the body and the mind. In its wake, leaves amputated body parts associated with phantom limbs and traumatization of the material brain, leading to PTSD. Today, this concept serves as an apt metaphor to describe the fog of the digital, or digital fog, that results from the explosive transformation of industrial capitalism into cognitive capitalism, in which the proletariat physically working on the assembly line has been transformed into the cognitariat working in front of screens producing data. An acceleration, according to Franco Berardi, in which the infosphere outruns the ability of our perceptual cognitive faculties to process it, leading to panic, anxiety, and hyperventilation, and as a result, dizziness. If the fog of early digitality wasn't enough, the addition of AI has added more ammunition to the causes of disorientation. At the core of this essay is that these techniques of war are connected to techniques of ecocide, the murder of the environment, and digitality, which together describe the Anthropocene. AI, in fact, is the latest instance in a long evolution of anthropogenic technologies that began with fire and spear points and continued through the invention of slash burning, the steam engine, the atomic bomb, and recently drones. The Anthropocene names the ways industrial capitalism and more recently cognitive capitalism, powered by digitality, have placed unprecedented stress on the environment, leaving technofossils in the Earth's crust and atmosphere. More recently, data centers supporting artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, have placed additional strain on local water resources at a time when climate change is intensifying global drought and increase the cost of energy for citizens who may or may not be emotionally invested in AI. Yet beyond these widely recognized ecological consequences, the Anthropocene, particularly in the contemporary global north, has generated another, less visible outcome, the emergence of a phylum of noetic technologies, or a noetic organology. The word noetic finds its roots in Greek word noesis or noeticus, that means inner wisdom, direct knowing, intuition, or implicit understanding. These technologies have accelerated what Bernard Stiegler calls de-noetization, the offloading of knowledge, memory, and creativity from the intracranial brain to extracranial external machines, especially those developed through cybernetics over the last 70 years. The result is a process of intellectual de-skilling and proletarialization, what Stiegler bluntly described as a condition that's making us stupid. It is this stupidity, as it is realized in de-skilling, externalization, and extraction, that produce a humanity today and in the future no longer capable of understanding the systems of signs and that envelops them, leading to a state of precarity. Echoing the words of Nicolas Bourriel in his lecture, key to this semiotic rupture is humanity's dependence on mathematization and statistics and their divorce from the natural world, resulting in their isolation. As we heard him quoting Hegel, the spirit is only the suppression of its otherness. This other that is not itself is nature. This divorce from nature is one of the factors leading to the predominant dizziness and stupor. My use of the word brain differs somewhat from the vernacular usages. The brain is not simply a crystallized, generically contrived material system of relations incarcerated inside the bony skull, subject to AI, digital normalization, and quantification through extractive, diagnostic, and interactive technologies such as PET scans, MRI, Google, and social media. Rather, it is an intracranial, extracranial complex characterized by a rhizomatic structure. As Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari wrote in The Thousand Plateaus, rhizomes construct maps that are always detachable, connectable, reversible, modifiable, and have multiple entryways and exits and their own lines of flight. A rhizome, in my word, is an acentered, non-hierarchical, non-signifying system without a general and without an organizing memory or central automaton defined solely by a circulation of states. Yes, the brain has an intracranial component consisting of populations of neurons and their complex synaptic array. However, its capacities are collective, as we learned from Agnieszka Courant, feminist, situational, physically embodied, and understood by Fulvia of Clairefontaine, and epigenetically enacted, technologically extended, ecologically distributed, with in an improvisational and contingent array of milieu of social, political, cultural, ecological, and technical relations and iterations in flux. I refer to this as the intracranial, extracranial complex or continuum, or as the brain without organs, as you will learn. Many here might call my definition of the brain mind-brain or brain-mind consciousness and question the use of this designation, which highlights a material approach. In the past, designations such as this, simply mind or consciousness, would have been enough to answer the pertinent questions of that day. But today, it simply doesn't work. The stakes are much higher. We cultural workers need a deep material understanding of the brain and its phenomenology to create a set of strategies to resist the impending neural digital despotism at our doorsteps. We need an aesthetic, linguistic armamentarium based on deep understanding on how the brain works in the expanded sense, as telepathy is used on the battlefield and chips are being inserted into brains that in the future could be egregious to our health and state of mind. For the past 40 years, I've been attempting this through my www.artbrain.org website and my Journal of Neuroaesthetics, started in 1996. We, Sarita and I, Sarita is not here right now, recently changed the name to https activistneuroaesthetic.art to counter the epistemicide of those in the neuroscientific community who appropriated my word and my category of neuroaesthetics for their own positivist rather than activist agenda. I'm just going to run through this so here's Activist Neuroaesthetics website. Activist Neuroaesthetic is a counter-insurgency to the assault on the neural commons, its neuroplastic potential and attentional proclivities that today Silicon Valley, with the help of neuroscience, is scheming to intercept and subsume. My book, The Glossary of Cognitive Activism, is available at Columbia University Press. We need to begin the process of clarification to combat dizziness and stupor that we see most clearly in the methodologies of the Trump presidency, fake news, attention, disattention, and surveillance, which I called out in my 2019 sculpture, which I showed at the Venice Biennale, called The Pizzagate Neon, and the film and video that I made with Ashik Kankar, who was helping us today, who was the editor, From Rumor to Delusion. So here's my 2019 about fake news, post-truth society called Pizzagate. Actually, it was, and then here is the film. I don't have time to show the film, but it's available. You can ask me later. And that was edited by a sheik here. He did an amazing job. Okay, in this talk, I want to develop 3 frameworks with which to battle against our present predicament, with special focus on alternative artificial intelligences and strategies of repair. My work, A Proposition for an Alternative Parthenon Marbles Recoded, The Phantom as Other, now showing at Kindle, was such an attempt. And it created, I can go through this, but basically the out singularity was the idea of 2 nodes on the, so this is okay, I'll go into it. It's an artificial neural network, a large language model, and on the inner layer are 2 nodes of scraping the internet, looking for patterns. They are the Parthenon marbles, which was in 1801 stolen from its perch on the Acropolis and moved to the British Museum, which integrates into this piece ideas of early colonialism. And also you see on their broken appendages, phantom limbs emerging from the various amputated organs, because the Parthenon marbles was part of classic Greek sculpture, which was incredibly alive and kind of human, and was very important for people like Wickelmann in describing the beginnings of the Enlightenment. And in this case, what I'm arguing is that there are two nodes scraping the internet, that of the Enlightenment and the epistemologies of scientific rationalism, and on the other hand, the phantom, the queer, the feminist, the other that is also gathering patterns, and then through its coming together, its concretization in a Simondonian way, in the hidden or middle layer of the artificial neural network, a new kind of architectonics is created, which outputs a de-optimized out-singularity, this moment when machine technology is supposed to overwhelm human technology, and I'll talk about it later, and then feeds back on Western civilization to change it, and the system goes on with a feed-forward mechanism and continues on infinitum. Anyway, is an attempt to produce an AI based on de-optimized, loving, post-human, feminist, queer principles. It joins other voices, such as those of Yuck Wee, to create a cosmotechnics that emerges outside the Western technical strategies of pure optimization and mathematical logics. In this test, I want to understand cognitive capitalism, especially in its late stage, as a special environment for a burgeoning new phylum of neural-based technology to emerge. I want to introduce and expand my aesthetic theory of the brain without organ as a pharmacon, on the one hand, as a means of emancipation, as well as capitulation. It is an umbrella term that describes the fundamental methods and apparatuses through which the process of what I am calling eco-planetary sapienization might be possible. And those 3 aspects of it, the brain without organs, which I'll go into depth, is neuroplasticity, material engagement theory, and metaplasticity of Lambros Maliforus, and 3, the neuronal recycling hypotheses of Stanislav Dehaene. I will then connect these theories to those of Bernard Stiegler, exosomatic organogenesis, in which the history of techniques is mirrored in a co-evolutionary choreography of the developing brain of the last 2.5 million years from Homo habilis to Homo sapien. As I will explain, this exosomatic organogenesis is dominated by techniques for the destruction of the environment and now humanity. So this exosomatic organogenesis, development of techniques, which has been mirrored in the brain, have been basically predominated by those techniques that are killing machines, used in war, or killing or protecting themselves from the environment, or burning the environment. And I'm calling for a new phylum of technologies which are eco-friendly or based on deep ecology and planetarity to create an ecoplanetary exosomatic organogenesis leading to an ecoplanetary sapien. This will form the foundation of my speculative proposal. I am calling for on first the Ecocene in opposition to the Anthropocene and its generative construct, anthropocentric exosomatic organogenesis, and want to replace it with an ecoplanetary sapienization as a mean of repair and revitalization. So let's get on with cognitive capitalism and its late stage. To begin to understand the particularities of our situation, we must understand cognitive capitalism, in which the mind and the brain are the new factories of the 20th and 21st century. We are no longer proletariats working on the assembly lines to produce things, but cognitariats swiping screens to create data. Screens whose designs, architectures, and operations creating a mesmerizing and hallucinating work environment, a seamless connection to the sensory cognitive apparatuses that became its partner in crime, only made more visceral and hypnotic by AI. It is no coincidence that neural-based technologies, that the neural-based neural networks, it's no coincidence that neural-based neural networks in the brain form the basis of modeling for deep learning artificial neural networks and the language of AI like synaptic weights. So here's a convoluted neural network that is based on the dorsal stream of object recognition starting in the visual cortex and going to the temporal lobe where spatial recognition is taking place. And you see it, they're models on each other. Okay, all right. These technologies present new forms of immersive environments that cloud reason understanding, which can incapacitate the subject. Think for a moment of doom scrolling, in which cognitarians slide personalized text and image vertically and horizontally, unaware of space and time. But whereas the proletariat's labor was restricted to the industrial shed, in a working day, we cognitarians, using our phones, laptops, iPads, work nonstop for free on social media, creating data used to produce personalized prompts and pokes by specialized advertisement sourced from our own online activity. Byung-Chun Han in Psychopolitics describes it: we are all solitary auto-exploiting laborers of our own enterprise, and people are now master and slave in one. Furthermore, as Bernard Stiegler has pointed out, another insidious effect of externalization and outsourcing, which I already mentioned, is this idea of proletarianization, through which hyper-industrial age becomes the era of systemic stupidity. As we enter late phase of cognitive capitalism, the brain and neural commons have become the focus of capitalistic adventurism and exploitation. The relation between early and late cognitive capitalism is fluid, and the digital fog can be a product of both. As such, in early cognitive capitalism, the fog of the digital is accentuated by information overload, fake news, deep fakes, the attention and inattention economy, deep surveillance, and the production of new forms of automation that have the potential to entirely replace human agency. More importantly, as we spend more and more time with our screens, this new mixology of what Paul Virilio called faticity, emphatically engineered stimuli, calls out to the brain's neuroplastic potential, sculpting its neural networks, creating new alien forms of disruptive individuation, new neuropsychopathologies such as panic disorder, obsessive compulsive eating disorders. And on the one hand, and what I first labeled in my 2002 book, Blow Up Photography, Cinema, and the Brain, Mnemonic Disruption Disorders, the result of subsumption of prosthetic memory, in which artificial memories experienced through the interactions with photography, cinema, and now AI, displace those resulting from artificial mediation, so-called real memories. Okay. Okay. Blow-up photography syndrome in the brain. Hold on, I want to go one back more. Sorry. Oh, I think I put it. Okay, there's blow-up photography syndrome in the brain. It's still available. Whatever. Think for a moment of the special memories created by watching your favorite movies, or those memories of your childhood with your families. Michelangelo Antonioni, 1966 film Blow Up, in which a prosthetic memory resulting from the accidental recording of a photograph of an ostensible murder taking place in Marianne Park in southeast London instigates a series of cinematic events, eventually leading to a psychological crisis in the same park at the end of the movie. Thomas engages in an imaginary tennis match with a group of early morning revelers, resulting from a schisis of the assemblage of real memories and his childhood and of his childhood and life with those recently produced by intense photographs which form the real artificial mnemotechnique. These become interchangeable with each other, creating confusion. And like the problem today of telling which student's paper has used AI, so too does the mind's eye. The two forms are many times indiscernible and indistinguishable. When his blow-up prints the evidence of the events that he experienced in the park, which proved for him that the murder had taken place, were stolen, an important component of his contemporary constructed self has been stolen as well. Today, a similar situation, although more intense and reified, is taking place with fake news, which is often remembered better than real news. 1, it is repeated endlessly in a network of media platforms. 2, it is novel and bizarre, characteristics that promote human memory. 3, it is threatening, which plays to the human brain's bias to prioritize such content called negativity bias. And 4, even if debunked and corrected, it lingers. Fake news is a sophisticated version of prosthetic memory and is a sophisticated prosthetic apparatus. Recently, deepfake, AI-generated images and videos have joined the cornucopia of advanced prosthetic memory. In my essay, Simulated Memory and the Wired Brain, the Emerging Superordinate Precariat, published in French in the journal Multitude, number 89, edited by Jean-Moulier Betang and Yves Citon, I call this type of memory simulated memory, following the lead of Jean Baudrillard in his Simulacra and Simulation. In the end, following again Baudrillard's lead, artificial mnemotechnique will overwhelm its real counterpart, in the end replacing it in late-stage cognitive capitalism, the memory capital and abstract labor of retrieval, rather than simply being engaged with the unconscious and subconscious system of reclamation and symptomatology in the Freudian states, take on another role as projected narratologies upon the screens of the mind eye. So I'm going to repeat that a little bit, sorry. I call this memory simulated memory, following the lead of Jean Baudrillard in his Simulacra and Simulation. In the end, following again Baudrillard's lead, artificial mnemotechnique will overwhelm its real counterpart, in the end replacing it totally. In late-stage cognitive capitalism, the memory capital and the abstract labor of retrieval, rather than simply being engaged with the unconscious and subconscious systems of reclamation and symptomatology in the Freudian states, take on another role as a projected narratologies upon the screens of the mind's eye. As we'll see, this results in a disruption of the narratological process performed and projected on the screen of the mind's eye, as these narratologies result from the combination and superposition of the real and the prosthetic. Might this sharing of the real and prosthetic evolve to a total replacement by the prosthetic simulated memory? That is also part of the singularity. Not only is it the moment in which technological decision-making is indistinguishable from human, but the moment when hyperreal replaces the real in the network architecture of human mnemotechnique. This forms the basis of what I'm referring to as the consciousness industry, which formed the basis of my hanging neon sculpture entitled From the Society of the Spectacle to the Consciousness Industry. Neural power, which has replaced biopower in neural capitalism, is a result of a displacement of the physical archive from a repository in a museum or collection in a Foucauldian sense to that of an imaginary archive of energies in the circuits that compose the ephemeral, eternal cinema of the mind's eye, and as we also saw in the networks that AI and the false archives that our AI investigates just recently. In the late cognitive capitalism, or what might also be called neural capitalism, the disciplinary power and the society of control are manifest here on the screen of the inner eye through the concretization of artificial and fake mnemotechnique. In late-stage cognitive capitalism, through a process of technogenesis and concretization in the sense outlined by Gilbert Simondon in his On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects, a contemporary armamentarium of neural-based apparatuses in their early developmental stage have joined advanced digital technologies like AI to produce the neural-digital entanglement. These neural-based technologies already present and on the horizon, such as the vision machine and its non-human visual gaze, brain-computer interfaces, the dopamine industrial complex, and optogenetics have the potential to create a material and immaterial cocktail with both potential and real paralyzing effects, overwhelming our sympathetic, somato and pathomnemotechnical systems that control reason and creativity with political consequences, especially seen in the United States, where everything happens a little faster than here. Time is limited, but just to say, despite the medical potential of these and their therapeutic application for treating conditions such as addiction, Alzheimer's disease, and epilepsy, optogenetics also carries the capacity to erase memories and implant false ones that have never occurred. Medical remedies often are a cover for the latent and insidious possibilities of these technologies. Make no mistake about it. AI is a neural technology working in nefarious ways despite its sometimes miraculous effects, as this recent article, Your Brain on ChatGPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt When Using AI Assistance for Essay Writing Task by Natalie Kosmyna. And that's, I want you all to read this. So it's Natalie and then Kosmyna. Using large language models for writing essays results in lower connectivity profiles, attenuated intensity, and scope of neural network communication, especially in the executive frontal lobe. In other words, cognitive offloading may increase cognitive atrophy through excessive reliance on AI-driven solutions, possibly changing our capacity to think freely and autonomously. This offloading, especially of the executive capacities of the frontal lobe, is not without dizzying effects. What are we going to do about this present predicament? So here is my answer. And it's made up of this idea of exomatic, ecoplanetary exomatic organogenesis. And here are the apparatuses, and it's a little neuroscientific, but let's hope we can go with it. So here I'm going to explain what the brain without organs is. Neuroplasticity, metaplasticity, and material engagement theory, and the neuronal recycling hypotheses. For Deleuze and Guattari, the problem of the organism is to make an alternative body without organs, which unleashes its unformed, unstable matters by flows in all directions, by free intensities, or nomadic singularity, by myriad of transitory particles. The brain without organs extends the concept of the body without organs, first articulated by Antonin Artaud, and later developed by Deleuze and Guattari in 1,000 Plateaus. Artaud famously wrote, "The body is the body, alone it stands, and in no need of organ. Organisms, it never is. Organisms are the enemies of the body. Following Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the body without organs, the brain without organs does not lack modules, hubs, or verifiable cognates. It simply lacks the organism. That is a particular organization of organs. The brain without organ is a rhizomatic, indeterminate, becoming organ in flux, and neuroplasticity is its agency. Like the body without organs, the brain without organs must also create an alternative brain with which to free itself from the imprisoning intensities of the material arrangements created on the one hand by the genetic code and on the other by the anthropocentric, politicized, socio-political, technological milieu of which AI is one. The brain with organs is a product of ergonomically organized material distributions in the socio-cultural milieu, styled for easy engagement with the brain. Today, these distributions are associated with performative gestures and complex choreographies of immaterial labor of the cognitariat, visual and cognitive ergonomic relations between the screen, how it's designed, how it's organized, how you move through it in time, and the sensorial, perceptual, cognitive system of the peripheral nervous system and the brain, perfected by a managerial system akin to Taylorism in industrial capital, what I call Hebbianism. I can't go into that right now, but it's in all my articles. What I refer to as what I refer to as mental surplus value. The brain with organs is constituted by the distribution of sensible and associated material artifacts and affordances that impose the political will of the sovereign. The brain without organs is the result of an aesthetic politics of the redistribution of the sensible and its material counterparts. Three linked apparatuses working synergistically describe the brain without organs that are important for the understanding of epochal and transgenerational mutation of the intracranial-extracranial complex or brain in the expanded sense. Neuroplasticity, again, material engagement, metaplasticity, and the neuronal recycling hypotheses. I want to briefly consider each. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is neuroplasticity. I'm going to go back actually to a better slide. Hold on. We missed it. Okay. So just to give a quickie here, this here is the occipital cortex, which is the visual cortex in a cat. And that is the part of the brain that sits in the far posterior of the brain. And the occipital cortex, in its developmental, this is a developmental slide. It's showing the right after birth and 17 days later. So and this is, the cerebral cortex, it basically goes all around the brain, and it's different in each area depending on the kind of cells and the kind of input it gets, but it's always 6 layers, layer 1, layer 2, 4, 5, and 6. And in layer 4, you see in the very beginning this entropic, hedge-like surplus of neural synaptic units that are disordered and entropic. And then the cat goes out and involves itself in the sensorial the environment that has meaning for him or her. It's social aggression, it's preliminary sexual, these different kinds of, it's hunting, all the things that are really important for the cat. And what happens is there is a pruning of that massive entropic entity into a finely tuned machine that is perfectly engaged with the cat Umwelt. And here we have this kind of neuroplasticity is part of human life as well. And there are actually two moments of neuroplasticity. The ages between like 2 and 5, and then between 12 and 15. And there's interesting things about this. And then we have, what do we have? We have our youngsters performing with the computer. And as you read from Andy Clark, imagine that you begin using the web at age 4. Dedicated software agents track and adapt to your emerging interests and random explorations. They then help direct your attention to new ideas, web pages, and products. Over the next 70 years, you and your software agents are locked in a complex dance of co-evolutionary change and learning, each influencing and being influenced by the other. In such case, in the very real sense, the software entities look less like part of your problem-solving environment than part of you. The intelligent system that now confronts the wider world is a biologically you plus software agents. These external bundles of code are contributing rather like various subpersonal cognitive functions activating your brain. So, now that you saw a little about neuroplasticity, although neuroplasticity has been described in many non-human nervous systems, it is most evident in the immature human cerebral cortex, that outside layer of the material brain made up of 6 layers that encompasses its entire surface. According to the neurobiologist Marcus Jacobson in his book Development Neurobiology, plasticity refers to certain types of adjustment of the nervous system to changes in the internal and external milieu. On the one hand, adjustments to the normal developing nervous system to changes in input from sensory system and related to changes to occurring in the intracranial, what I call the intracranial habitus, related to focal brain injury or the process of intrauterine and early postnatal development. Importantly, malleability of the nervous system is not restricted to critical periods of development occurring in early age and beginning in the teens, but rather continues to old age, although in an undiminished forms. Critical or sensitive periods are an important concept. That's critical and sensitive periods are an important concept. They refer to the windows of time at which the nervous system is exquisitely sensitive to the outside world. According to Peter Huttenlocher, in his fantastic book on neuroplasticity from 2002, Harvard professor, they represent windows of opportunity for interventions to occur. This malleability leads to an increased capacity for learning, which in turn provides an opportunity for the improvement of cerebral functioning that cannot be reproduced to the same extent or with the same ease later in life. Now we're going to go into material engagement theory and the neuronal recycling hypotheses. Lambros Malaforis, who's an archaeologist at Oxford University, and he has an MIT book out. I've taught with him. I've had the opportunity to teach with him at Oxford a few times. Lambros Malaforis' theory of material engagement provides a framework for understanding how objects, things, and their relations, evolving through deep history and entangled with genetic, behavioral, environmental, and sociocultural processes, instigate bidirectional transformation between the cultural environment and the brain. This theory replaces older models in cognitive neuroscience that treated relatively stable genes as the primary determinants of cognitive architecture and behavior. Material engagement draws on a post-genomic perspective that understands the human mind as an open-ended and unfinished process, potentially in a permanent state of ongoing evolution. At the heart of this approach is the premise that humans do not merely adapt to their environments, they actively transform them. And those transformed environments, in turn, recursively reshape human cognition in a never-ending transactional spiral of feedback and feed-forward loops. And by the way, who are those humans who are creating and changing the environment? Artists, poets, filmmakers. Malaforis describes the reciprocal process as metaplasticity. That's another important term, metaplasticity, metaplasticity, which he defines as the condition in which different forms of plasticity, neural, extraneural, biological, and cultural, operate synergistically in a temporally and spatially distributed manner. This approach is closely linked to what Malaforis calls neuroarchaeology. Neuroarchaeology sees the brain not as a fixed modular structure produced by long evolutionary processes, but an evolving plastic organ in flux. Both metaplasticity and neuroarchaeology align with my concept of the brain without organs. In his later essay, I think I'll skip that. The other term I was wanting to tell you was the neuronal recycling hypotheses. So these two are extremely important Plasticity is involved both with neuronal recycling and the material engagement theory. They're essential, neuroplasticity. But neuronal recycled plasticity offers a model for understanding how, in spite of the strong anatomical and connectional constraints inherited from evolution, accumulation of cultural artifacts, most notably writing and language, can exert selective pressure on the brain's plastic organization, particularly in regions whose circuitry are already close to the required function needed for reading. More broadly, it provides a speculative model for considering how exposure to a plethora of planetary epistemologies and ecocentric technologies might also colonize and reorganize more ancient areas of the brain, assuming a sufficient degree of plasticity, inducing novel neuroanatomical adjustments in regions that share analogous structures and physiologies for new forms of processing. Coined by the French neuroscientist Stanislav Dehaene, the neuronal recycling hypothesis explain how the brain developed a specialized capacity for reading despite the relatively recent invention of writing, which first emerged in the Sumerian cuneiform tablets represented 5,000 years ago. The hypothesis was formulated to address the reading paradox, the fact that reading is too recent for cultural innovation to have evolved through slow mechanism of genetic mutation and natural selection, the backbone of Darwinian evolution. Here's the cuneiform tablets, and we are going to talk about this now. Okay. Neural circuits originally established for one person can undergo exaptation, a term introduced by American paleontologists Stephen Jay Gould and Elizabeth S. Verba to describe a trait such as feathers, first evolved for thermal regulation, which was later co-opted for flight. In the case of neuronal recycling, the cultural novel activity of reading colonizes, that's Dehaene's expression, cortical regions originally devoted to other functions. Reading is therefore a form of acceptation that repurposes neural circuitry used for another function. Although I do not have a space to discuss here other recycled circuits, such as those for arithmetic, located in the left and right intraparietal sulcus, but I mention them in passing to illustrate that their existence indicates that neuronal recycling is performed in other areas of the cerebral cortex, which suggests that other cortical areas may be similarly converted under appropriate cultural conditions according to different kinds of accumulations in a Marxian sense. Rather than proposing, as others have, that reading competence emerged from a novel, dedicated cortical module, Dehaene hypothesized a different theory for its emergence based on brain's plasticity, which explains how accumulated cultural niches, such as reading, you can imagine how at first, after the cuneiform tablets, reading was a specialized practice, but then it was so important and gave such advantage to those people who could do it that it spread and was distributed. And now, it becomes such an important aspect of, for instance, surrealism and Dadaism and the idea of the poster and the cinema and the poetry, and it just accumulates and it spreads until it starts affecting large swaths of the population. Novel cultural functions, such as reading, can be acquired when they encounter a suitable cortical substrate capable of accommodating them, an area referred to the cognitive function's neuronal niche, and again, his name, or neuronal cultural niche. Okay? So here we have, in a mock, a simian, a mock brain on the right, which is used for articulating and understanding facial gesticulations. You can imagine, like this, and making lines on your forehead, or guarding your teeth. It's a whole series of morphologies that could be converted, that could be shared with language and reading. which then, in a very, very similar area of the human brain, is converted through neuronal recycling. So then what I'm arguing is that there are many parts in the brain. There's already been proof of the areas for arithmetic and counting and all that kind of thing. But many of these areas have latent spaces, why don't I call it that have certain kinds of architectures, like the latent space has an architecture. And as I was trying to show through convoluted neural networks, many of the propositions of AI, of convoluted neural networks, are very important for AI, that those architectures are taken from architectures in the brain. So you can imagine there are other latent architectures in the brain ready to be culturally colonized by new kinds of capacities. And I'm arguing that at this moment, that architecture is, according to exosomatic organogenesis, is a manifestation of an anthropocentric techniques. And that I'm arguing for, we need to produce an eco-scenic exosomatic organogenesis to convert other areas of latent capacities of the neurobiological function into new kinds of architectures that give us new capacities to think and to understand. Let's talk, I'm getting to the end of my talk now, but I still have a little bit to go. Let's talk about exosomatic organogenesis in late-stage cognitive capitalism. Bernard Stiegler's theory of exosomatic organogenesis is central to the understanding of the process of hominization over the past 2 million years. In his Nanjing lectures, Bernard Stiegler states, hominization is the continuation of organogenesis, but in an exosomatic way. As with many organs, the brain has always organologically been augmented and transformed itself. This self-transformation is precisely what characterizes human life, insomuch as it also an immediately technical life. That is, a form of life that realizes its dreams. That's a quote from him. Stiegler has referred to this technological cortical brain mirroring as instrumental meiotics, a mirror protostage in the course of which the differentiation of the cortex, this is a quote, is determined by the tool just as much as that tool by the cortex. A mirror effect whereby one, looking at itself in the other, is both deformed and formed in the process. This process of exosomatic organogenesis, the history, you can imagine, the history of the tool and the history of the development of the brain, that's what the mirroring is, that for every one of these changes in technologies, there's a change in the brain, and then it feeds back onto the tool production, and so forth and so on. Our brains are organogenically organized in deep history by the techniques of destruction of the planet and each other. Ecoplanetary organogenesis is based on different principles and speculates upon how a new phylum of techniques, based upon the values of planetarity and deep ecology, that defines a new regime, an epoch, what I am calling the Ecocene, since 2009, could create an ecoplanetary sapien with healing results for the planet. The Ecocene is the next epoch, based on the values of deep ecology. In order to produce ecoplanetary sapiens capable of understanding and acting upon the repairing the ecological devastation now unfolding, I propose a new way of understanding the power to resist this domination through the activation and unshackling of novel sociological organizational forms and anti-anthropocentric cultural networks together with their neuroplastic counterparts. Today, I'm calling for a decolonization of the brain and mind from the algorithmic governmentality and coming singularity. And then, as I already showed you, my work that's at, at the museum in Berlin, Kindle. Before engaging in ecoplanetary exosomatic organogenesis and ecoplanetary sapien, it's necessary to define what planetary is and what deep ecology is. For Depeche Chakrabarty, the planetary decenters human agency from its privileged position within the history of the species and reconnects the division between natural and human history and deconstructs the relationship between Western and non-Western binaries. Yuck Wee's formulation in Machine Sovereignty for Planetary Thinking, and Yuck is going to be speaking with us in Berlin. To think planetarily, first of all, means thinking beyond the configuration of the modern nation state, which have not been able to move away from the vicious economic and military competition. Second, it means reformulating a language of coexistence that will allow diverse people and species to live on the same planet. And third, developing a new framework that will enable us to go beyond the question of territory, responding to the current ecological crisis, and reverse the accelerated entropic process of the Anthropocene. Deep ecology, according to Arness and George Sessions in the Deep Ecology Movement, Some Philosophical Aspects, advocates for a set of principles that challenge the human-centered assumptions of the Anthropocene, replacing them with a philosophy in which humans are neither superior to nor privileged over other forms of life, and in which all living beings possess intrinsic value, independent of their usefulness to human beings. Central to deep ecology is the understanding that human and non-human life are intricately interwoven within a matrix of relations that is non-hierarchy, holistic, rhizomatic, and network. As such, it rejects metaphysical naturalism, in which humans are understood as distinct from and superior to nature. Furthermore, deep ecology affirms the intrinsic value of complexity, symbiosis, and diversity of human life. The first two tenets of deep ecology resonate with Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Chulacene, which critiques the Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Plantaceocene complex, while foregrounding multi-species cognition, situated knowledge, messy entanglements, speculative fabulation, and multidisciplinary collaboration. As mentioned earlier, the Anthropocene leaves its contaminated vestiges in the atmosphere and the Earth's crust, but is also an epistemological, self-enabling system of beliefs participating in epistemicide of deep ecological thought. Now, epistemicide is another very important word. In Epistemologies of the South, Justice Against Epistemicide, Bonaventure de Souza Santos defines epistemicide as murder of knowledge. Cultures subordinated through colonial expansion suffer a profound loss of epistemological confidence as their native semiotic systems, body of knowledge, and material objects, things, and practices those traditions generate are subjugated, rendered invisible, and systematically devalued, along with the social cultural practices through which those knowledges are sustained and reproduced. Now remembering material engagement theory, epistemicide degrades the material distributions of native cultural artifacts, whether they be cultural, social, religious, and replaces them with those of the colonizer. This devastation then creates unequal distributions of affordances via metaplasty that scopes the mnemotechny of the brains of the native population and their capacity to create internalized narratology of future thoughts. Although epistemicide has most often been used to describe colonial apparatuses of repression, enslavement, and cultural erasure, I adapt the term here to name the suppression and disruption of planetary and deep ecological ways of knowing and acting by digital systems and platform capitalism. Greenwashing and digital washing combine to repress notions of deep ecology and systems of thought outside the homogenizations and normativity of digitality. Digitality creates digitality. I am referring to this process as ecocide. Ecocide subverts epistemological systems that create counter-hegemony to the Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Plantaceocene complex. Ecoagnosia, the inability to contemplate climate change, akin to what Bruno Latour calls climatic quietism, is a neuropsychopathology resulting from ecocide and its neuromaterial epistemological consequences. The Trump administration hostility towards environmental regulation and its continued support for fossil fuels, despite accelerating climate change, is an example of ecoagnosia and provides one of its contemporary examples. Our limitation one limitation of Bernard Stiegler's account is that it concentrates too much on those technologies that define the Anthropocene and tends to forget the significance of natural, unforged entities such as trees, rocks, and stars. Ecoplanetary frameworks understand tertiary memories, again the Stiegler term, are also preserved and externally stored as ecological narratologies inscribed on indigenous carvings and weavings, Marshall Island sticks, shell maps used for navigation, ritualized rites of passage ceremony, as well as otherings of transgenerational social relations and sociogeny. In deep ecoplanetary exosomatic organogenesis, such unformed and culturally embedded tertiary retentions must be included in the planetary epistemology of new diversity. New diversity refers to the system of thought that engages with a diversity of thought, reasoning, understanding, interpretation. Ecoplanetary retentions, the actual sensory, for instance, what is a primary retention? Just to go back a little bit, it's the actual experience of a musical tone. Secondary retentions, the experience of the sensory, first experience the sensory tune. The secondary retention is the form of memory of the melody and allows you to remember and to sing to yourself in your mind's ear, and are reenacted in the mind's ear. And tertiary retentions are materialized in cultural artifacts like vinyl records and MP4s and the skin of architecture, and create different material distributions of cultural memory with which to engage with humanity than those created by the triad of the Anthropocene, Capitalocene, Pleistocene. The power and the force of ecoplanetary retentions, primary, secondary, tertiary, grounded in unforged, indigenous, queer, and ancestral complex objects and network relations, conserved as multiple strata of the past, may exceed those generated by rational scientific epistemologies. For instance, traditional indigenous ecological methods used in caretaking the forest, depending as they do on sustainable rather than extractive methods, are known to be superior. In other words, extending Bernard Stiegler's concept of instrumental meiotics, I argue that in ecoplanetary exosomatic organogenesis, this accumulation and conservation of ancestral ecoplanetary tertiary techniques and the retentions they generate are mirrored also within the neural architectonics and synaptologics of the material brain and its artistic counterparts, not forgetting that this process is then mirrored back into the socio-cultural technical milieu in a spiraling transgenerational procession unfolding across deep time. This gives resonance to Stiegler's idea of consubstantiation of the neural and technical. It lies at the heart of deep ecoplanetary exosomatic organogenesis and the continual renewal of intracranial, extracranial circuits in our present epoch and those yet to come. I want to hypothesize that the architecture of the intracranial, extracranial complex and its consciousness is currently entangled and complexified with the anthropocentric locks of neoliberal capitalism and with the obsolete modernist ideal of endless linear economic growth and progress characteristic of dying modernism. Against this configuration, I propose the possibility of a counterproduction with another outcome. If we have the courage to bring it into being, I want to suggest this idea of an ecoplanetary sapienzation. Thank you very much.
First question from our online audience for the two of you. This is someone who's obviously a professor. He or she asks whether or not you're awake to solve this problem. They state that their students, when asked to analyze an article on efflux, instead the students input the article into ChatGPT for a summary. They asked, do you have advice on how to get the students to actually read the article instead of using ChatGPT to summarize?
Please.
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
Read it and maybe to read it together in presence so that we are sure that they're reading it and that is perfect.
I think that's a very good thing. I think we have to move away from this idea of homework and assignment into, cooperative, some cooperative events like this and discuss things. And the thing about it is that we have to get, in the United States especially, I think we have to get rid of the idea of Darwinism. I don't even think Darwinism may be right. I think that this idea of competition and always understanding even discussions as competitive is wrong-headed. And I think we have to create ideas of cooperative discussions. And we have to read together and cooperatively understand these things together.
Okay. And I even would add that, okay, let's say the students have done the sum up with ChatGPT. But what would be valuable then would be, again, to discuss that collectively, because maybe some students would react and say, okay, I didn't understand that in that way. And that would force them to engage with the text. And I think it's always interesting to ask somebody else to look at what we have produced, just as we are doing peer reading. Why shouldn't we introduce that even before when people are students?
I think that a lot of times ChatGPT can be very helpful to learning. I don't think it's a negative thing. I think there's two things I have to say. Reading, having the students have read it and asked ChatGPT for an answer, I think is an initial stage. Okay, it's initial. It's the beginning of a conversation. The second thing I'd like to say, and this is what I was trying to talk about in my artwork, this artwork on the Parthenon marbles, is that we need to develop different kinds of ChatGPT, de-optimized. That's what my whole project at the Kindle is all about, creating an alternative. I mean, I did that, by the way, 5 years ago. It's been seen in 7 museums, never in the United States, but it has been shown in 7 museums. And so it's not something that I'm like getting on a bandwagon about. It's something that I was writing about and made that piece in 2021. And I was always saying this idea of creating an alternative type of AI. It's not that AI is wrong. It's based on the wrong suppositions. And it's being used by capitalism in a very aggressive and uncomplimentary way. I think we need to change the precedences of ChatGPT to make it more sharing and more loving and democratic, and less about making money, and more about betterment for society.
Yes, thank you. Nicholas Boyard has a question. Please go ahead.
If I may, while you are writing yourself, I just wanted to ask you something about the Parthenon piece. You've said it was exhibited in various places, and I was wondering if it has been staged, I don't know, maybe in Africa or in Asia, and if yes, would you consider putting another sculpture, because it is also a kind of, even if it was looted, but establishing a kind of Western canon?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a critique of the Western canon.
Yes, I know.
And it's also an expansion of how we can understand that. I think that's also a basic problem. Even when we are, like I mentioned, colonizing other constitutions and putting our own cultures on top of that. At the time that I made that piece, I didn't feel that comfortable with using a sculpture from another culture, because I thought that might imply that I was using it inappropriately. Mm-hmm. So I felt that more comfortable with using something I was very aware of. The answer to your second question is that it has shown twice in Asia, and it was very much appreciated. In fact, if it wasn't for them, all my sculptures, actually all my work has been shown in Asia. And it's now coming back to Europe, especially Holland, the Netherlands, has shown most of it, have shown all the pieces. So, yeah, but I understand. And yes, the answer is, I don't know if I still would feel comfortable doing a piece with the Benin bronzes or anything like that. But I would hope, as I say about my work, my writing, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what an ecoplanetary sculpture is. I mean, I've made a few, but I don't even know. I'm waiting for the next generation hearing my ideas. Are there artists who have maybe greater proficiencies than me to make those works?
Okay, great. Now we have a question from Nicholas.
Darwinism has nothing to do with competition. It's what Darwin by Counterfactual.
Right.
Gender. Struggles for life. Darwin is personal struggle for each. Well, she's a party.
Well, there is competition. No, that I mean, yeah, there is. I mean, I know. Okay. Well, we can talk about it afterwards. But in actuality, there is competition for similar ecological niches, and when two species are trying to compete for a specific ecological niche, there is competition, and there is mutation and evolution through epigenetic mechanisms that turn on and turn off different parts of the genome, which is called neo-Darwinism, which is not the same as the Darwinism of the 19th century. But neo-Darwinism does take place in that. Just one more, I get in before you do. Remember that concept of metaplasticity, which is cultural plasticity and neuroplasticity. If you read Lambros Maliforis, so that's a great question. Thank you so much. And but I covered a little bit in that with my idea of metaplasticity. But please.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think this plasticity quality you stress is totally due in the case of AI to the architecture itself of latent space, in which billions of dimensions are available and which reconfigurate all the traces we have. So what is interesting is a kind of paradox, because when the events or the traces of the events are digested by the AI latent models, they are compressed and reduced. But at the same time, they are like demultiplied. And I think this tension is really interesting, because the fact is reduced, but at the same time, we can imagine billions of versions of it. So for artists, I think it's a wonderful material.
Gregory Cherkansky has the idea of quaternary retention. So he's taking the idea of her cell, and as it was adapted by Deleuze, not by Bernard Stiegler, and he adds to the primary retention and the secondary retention a tertiary retention. And he says that the latent spaces of the AI gives the opportunity for quaternary retention.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
in other words, where his life archive can be replayed in a multiplicity of times.
Yes. At the same time, I would like to add to answer you that to play with time and with versions of time is not new, of course, with AI. And in contemporary arts, we have so many projects before AI was there, which would propose and suggest alternative archives. So I would say that in that sense, AI is just the enhancement of a trend which was already there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now we have a question from you, Claire.
Okay. Thank you both for. So I obviously have two questions. Both of you raised a few things. The first one is, I've been quite intrigued and obsessed by Rony, which we translated mostly by alternate reality, but you made as a counterfactual. And what I found fascinating at the moment, I've been interested and intrigued by the idea of, the epistemic warfare, where comparatively to the narrative warfare was like, we changed the narrative. Now we're going one step beyond. We literally changed the culture on which people are operating. And I was wondering if you feel that we are not experiencing today, we've been one step further where we are basically living in a real-time uchronie where literally each of us, because of the device we use, because of the environment we're in, literally are, it started with the fake news, but now it's, as you see, it become a live rewriting. It's like George Orwell on steroid, where you literally, or Brazil on steroid, where you literally live writing the fact in a real-time basis. That is something that I believe we haven't probably been equipped. And that is my first question. But the second thing you said something that I found really interesting, is that there's several parts of our brain. And right now we've been attacking the first level with attention. Basically now we're moving into the memory by alter. But there's so many other things, our ability for empathy, our ability, emotions based out of the work we do, so many things. So it kind of felt like it's becoming a multi-stage attack on all the different parts of the brain, something that I had never really
We're in the very
thought out
beginning.
before. Yeah.
We're in the beginning.
Yes. So that was my question. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
My questions.
So we could say, if we go in the direction you suggest, that we would be in a Uchronia of Uchronia, because if Uchronia is perpetually rewritten, there is no time for those written Uchronia to be related to. So that would be the first thing. The other thing is that in the term of Uchronia itself, there is a parallel with utopia. So with a kind of good promise. And what you describe would be more a dyschronia, we could say.
Related to what you just said, who's becoming the source of truth? Because if we live in a world where everything is tempered at real time, do we need real-time historians that are actually trying to excavate the truth from an insane amount of alternative possibilities? How do you... Because in some ways, some of the artists that you've been talking about are pretty much ahead of something that maybe all of us will have to learn to do.
I think we need more and more time, in fact, because the task of the historian and of the analyst is becoming increasingly difficult. But I wouldn't say real time. I think we need historians with much more distance than before.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have another question from our audience. An audience member asks, Warren, since yesterday you seemed to suggest that we should reject AI as it is, are you proposing or essentially in favor of some type of rejectionism of AI?
AI is here to stay. It is going to be part of our lives. It's too much money is involved in AI. Too many, like I met your children. Both of them are working with AI. I mean, it's the source of income for a whole new generation of young workers. It's the place where they're getting jobs out of school. It's not going to go away. What I'm suggesting is to refurbish it, to make a better AI, one that is I'm not the only one saying this. Now I've been hearing, when I read the news, other people are saying it, but 5 years ago when I was trying to say that, nobody was listening to me. But okay, whatever. That's the role of an artist. But the fact of the matter is I'm just thinking that we have to use it with ecology in mind, not destroying the towns and communities with these large, the big data faculties, which are ugly and putting stress on energy and water. We have to think, and that'll come. That's always the problem with new technologies. They're in the beginning. Look at the size of a stick. We now have 1 terabyte sticks, whereas before, if you had 650 megabytes, you were lucky. So things are going to change, things are going to evolve, but we have to, I think we need to adapt a non-capitalist system to AI and put people first and not wealth distributed in a few people's hands.
If I may add, I think in that respect, artists have a very special role because there are many examples of artists today who are trying to create their own AI models. I think when we speak of AI, we have really to distinguish what type of AI we are discussing and we are speaking of. For instance, Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, they state that today the main artistic task is to create AI models, and that the creation of AI model is an artwork per se. An AI model which is created collectively, which is respectful of copyright issues, which is transparent. So there are alternatives which are being built. And I know that Hito Steyer is also creating her own model. Maybe she will speak of it tomorrow. So it's very important to follow those artistic developments because they may pave the path for us.
The only problem with that is, I hope, and I love what you're saying, and I embrace it. However, as we know from the history of capitalism, basically new ideas are refashioned into capitalism. Look at the whole net, the internet, which had in the 1970s was so utopic. You know, we all had such aspirations and hopes for it, and now it's been completely taken over. So I don't know, but maybe.